Okay guys, who wants to see a big bang Gen 3 Hemi? You know what I'm talking about. Junkyard Hemi, ring gap, heads cam intake, turbo, turn the boost, all the way up. Here's the question, what will it make? More importantly, what can it take? In this video, we're gonna take a stock, used 5.7 liter Hemi from a Dodge Ram. We're gonna add ring gap. We're gonna change the camshaft. We're gonna port the stock heads. We're gonna add an SRT8 intake manifold. Then we're gonna add boost. We're gonna find out how much those notoriously weak 5.7 liter Hemi pistons can actually take. I'll give you a hint. It's more than you think.
More than any other big bang motors like the LS and the Big Block and the 351 and the Honda, I was excited about doing the Hemi one because it had a reputation of being weak. Much weaker than the other combinations. It had a bad piston was the theory on the internet. Now, and while it did have a fairly thin, like, top ringland, because that's the way that they designed it, they were trying to improve the emissions on the thing, and that was one of the ways that they did it, is to get that ring pack up. So the piston, you know, comparatively speaking, probably is weaker than other combinations, but that's not what really makes these things break. It's just like everything else. The two big reasons why these Hemis break is because of tune and because of not increasing the ring gap. I mean, guys don't want to go to the trouble of increasing the ring gap and taking the motor apart before they put a blower on or a turbo on, and that's usually what the cause of the problem is. You can make a lot of power with these Hemis, even with a stock piston, if you do it correctly, and that's what this Big Bang thing was all about. So to do that, I selected a 2006 5.7 liter, early 5.7 liter from a Dodge Ram. I bought the motor from a wrecking yard. I didn't even go get this one because the Ram stuff was hard to find, especially back then. But I bought that motor and had it shipped here, and it actually had fewer miles than any of the other Big Bang motors that I tested. It only had 65 or 70,000 miles, which is a lot different compared to the 200 or 240,000 miles on some of the other combinations that I ran. So to get this thing to make power, what I did was we did the same thing that we do on all the others. We upgraded it. So on the short block, we took it apart, added ring gap to it. I put new head gaskets on it and ARP head studs. We also stuck a camshaft in it to help it make power. Now, back then, there weren't a lot of cams available for it, so I selected an off-the-shelf comp cam. It was their 273 cam. It offered 547, 550 lift split, a 224, 228 degree duration split, at 114 degree lobe separation angle, and it's getting close to kind of the biggest cam that you want to put in there with available piston to valve clearance, especially because we had our heads sent off to the guys at Total Engine Airflow to have them ported, and they also milled the head slightly, I think 20 or 25 thousandths. So I was starting to get concerned about piston to valve clearance. They did a really good valve job on the heads, and these heads actually ended up working very well. In fact, this whole combination worked very well, along with the ported heads, which flowed enough to support certainly around 700 horsepower, which was more than we were ever going to make on this, like, you know, fairly mild 5.7 liter. They flowed well, and obviously we're going to work well under boost. And we topped those with an SRT8 intake manifold, the aluminum SRT8 manifold. In retrospect, having tested the truck and the Magnum and the SRT8, they all actually work very well, and I could have just as easily used the truck intake manifold. But we used the SRT8, and we did a little port matching because I tried a bigger LS throttle body with an adapter on there to find out if there was any power. And as it turned out, at this power level, there really wasn't much of a gain from the LS throttle body. We ran this combination with an XFI management system with big injectors sized for the turbo application. I think that they were, I want to say that they were 80s or 85s, and we jacked the static pressure up when we ran it under boost. We also ran these with the long tube headers, and once we tuned this thing made 511 horsepower and 455 foot-pounds of torque. So the combination together actually worked very well NA, and it was a good combination, a good starting point. But now we had to find out what was going to happen when we ran this thing under boost. After making good power with our NA Hemi combination, obviously I was excited to add boost to it. And we're going to go over all of the mistakes that I made after we go through the power numbers here. And we can talk about what things could be improved and maybe get this Hemi to make even more power on another go-around, because I think that there's power left to be had in this thing. We'll talk about all that stuff at the end. So what we did was add a single turbo to this 5.7 liter Hemi, and it was a Precision 76 It's a 76, 75 turbo, and unfortunately I don't have a lot of specs on it. It was a CEA billet wheel. I mean, it was kind of a what they were calling a double throwdown turbo, and we know that it was capable of exceeding 1,000 horsepower. We've done that a number of times with it, but I think that on this combination we were probably pushing it, probably getting close to its limit. I think mostly on the hot side, but again, another mistake I made was not running back pressure on this to find that out. So we ran that turbo, and I ran a single air-to-water intercooler from CX Racing. It was a 3.5 inch in and out. It was a single core, big core, and again, it's a combination or an intercooler that we've used a lot to do over 1,000 horsepower. So we knew it had plenty of potential. I don't think it was taxed at this kind of boost level. And besides, this was a Hemi, and there's no way that it was going to make over 1,000 horsepower under boost with a turbo, because the piston was going to break long before that happened. But let's take a look and see what happened when we ran our turbo. First, we obviously ran it at various different boost levels, and I ran this with a mechanical, basically a bleed valve boost controller, not an electronic controller. But here's what happened when we added 10.4 pounds of boost. The power output jumped to, where are we at here? 872 horsepower. And peak torque out here was 755 foot-pounds of torque. You can see it's kind of getting flat there. That's where the wastegate was kind of controlling it. The boost was at least fairly consistent out at the top. I had a bit of a rising boost curve on this, which was good. I think that's probably what helps the thing, because I think torque is probably what kills these things and breaks the rods and maybe breaks the pistons too eventually. But we weren't done there. Obviously, we kept going up and up in boost, and eventually got up near 20 pounds, 19.8 psi on this, again, stock short block with ring gap. So here's where we got to. We got to over 1,100 horsepower, 1,120 horsepower, and peak torque checked in at 993 foot-pounds of torque. Again, you can see slight rising curve here because of the way our controller was set up. We had 2 wastegates on this, and the combination worked very well. The Hemi responded very well. It made really good power under boost because we were starting out with a good combination. We had a combination that made 500 plus horsepower NA. And what I did was on this Hemi, and we'll go over all of this. I was pretty conservative on the tune on this thing because, again, I was concerned about the weak piston because, the internet tells us that those are definitely weak and they're definitely going to break. So we did run this thing, obviously, on race gas. We ran a 118 Rocket brand race gas, and we had the intercooler on it. And here's where we got to. But as you can see, we stopped the run at about 6,200. And the reason for that is this thing started kind of huffing like a freight train. So we ended up hurting something. We actually ended up hurting a piston, but it broke in between the first and second ring, and it did not break the top crown of the ring where everyone says it's weak. And like I said, we had between 30 and 32 thousandths ring gap, so I don't think it was a ring gap problem. Maybe it was a strength problem. You guys let me know in the comments what you guys think. But it started getting really bad blow-by. So this is where we stopped. The motor was still running. It hadn't, blown itself to bits yet. But it was definitely done wanting to be turbocharged after this. So I think we might need to take a look at, a redo on the 5.7 liter Hemi and find out exactly what they'll take if we end up doing it right. So let's talk about right now. Let's talk a little bit about what it would take to do this thing right.
Okay guys, now it's time to talk about what went wrong and what I would change if I did this test again on the 5.7 liter Hemi. First of all, over 1,100 horsepower on the 5.7 Hemi was way more than I thought I'd even get to. I mean, everybody was telling me those things break at 7 pounds or 8 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever their number is. And the reality is, if everything is right, you can make a lot more power than people think. We found this out with the Honda and the big block Chevy and the 351 Windsor, even though I did that one wrong. Obviously with the LS stuff, there's a lot more power than that, especially if you add ring gap and then apply different power adders, the intake manifold, the heads, the camshaft, and then add boost the proper way. If the tune is right and you've got ring gap, you can make a lot of power. And we made over 1,100 horsepower with this 5.7 liter Hemi. But that doesn't mean that I did everything right. In fact, I absolutely did not. And here are the things that I would change. First of all, I did not run I ran an air-to-water intercooler, but I did not run the core that I normally run, because then if we can back up a little bit, I also ran a single turbo, which I think we were getting close to being maxed out on that turbo, certainly on the back pressure. And again, there's another problem. I didn't run back pressure measurements. I should have monitored the back pressure, and I would have saw that we were getting near the flow limit, certainly on the hot side of that single 78 or 76, 75 turbo from Precision. It's a good turbo. We've made a lot of power with it, but that's about the maximum I think we could expect out of that thing, especially at that boost level and I'm sure the attending back pressure. So I should have ran 2 turbos. That's my first mistake. I should have run like the 2 S475s that we ran on these other big bang motors. The Hemi definitely deserves that, and obviously it was on its way to make pretty decent power. So twin turbo is definitely a must. And with the twin turbos was the dual core intercooler that I normally run on all of the big bang LS stuff on the big block. So 2 turbos, the right intercooler, and then I should have run ice water like I normally do. When we're turning the boost up to 20 pounds or something, ice water not only makes everything safer, it also adds power. As we saw, if you do the formula, the patented Holder power boost formula, you'll see that our NA power output multiplied by the boost doesn't get us to where we were. It wasn't far off, but I had a conservative tune on this thing, knowing that we didn't have ice water, knowing that I was probably getting near the limit of the turbo and stuff. So I could have done that. I could have done a much better job. But I didn't have a twin turbo setup for the Hemi. All I had was a single, and I wanted to use that because it was easy and convenient. And again, I never thought that we'd get over 1,000 horsepower on this thing. Everyone was telling me, no, it's going to break at 800 horsepower, 900 horsepower, whatever the number is. So, twin turbos, the dual core intercooler, ice water. Obviously we would need bigger injectors. I also think that there's a much better camshaft for this. Not that that camshaft didn't work well and didn't allow us to make good power, but the new, more modern camshafts that Comp has available for the Hemi, definitely much better. Now, what do you guys think about cylinder heads? I think that these ported TEA heads actually worked pretty well. They made a lot of power. They made a lot of power NA. It was a good combination, so it was a good starting point. I think with that much power, over 500 horsepower NA, we certainly can get to some fairly big power numbers if we start adding boosts, especially if we did it correctly. Now, what about the intake manifold? Again, the SRT8 was a good intake manifold. We can make a lot more low-speed power with a Magnum intake manifold, or maybe a bit more top-end power if all we cared about was running, like maybe the single 4-barrel deal, the Mopar Performance one, or there are other ones available from other people too, that kill some of the bottom-end torque, but add peak power at the top. And that might kind of be what we're looking for, because I think it might be the thing that's going to hurt these things normally is a big torque number, and that could help me get rid of some of the big torque number. And also, obviously, running a manual wastegate controller, not optimum. If I ran an electronic controller, we could have better control over the 2 wastegates that I would normally run, especially with the twin turbo. We could dial it in. We could have the boost come in relation to RPM. So again, we could kill some of the torque and just have a big peak power number. There are a lot of things that we could do to, I think, give the Hemi a much better shot at making a big power number before we actually hurt something on the piston. And that's exactly what we did on this combination. I ended up hurting a ringland when we took it apart. It was a bad ringland, but all I had to do was put another piston in, and we did that, and the thing still runs. It ran okay. We didn't do another big bang test after that for all the reasons that I just mentioned. If we were going to do it again, we would want to do probably a better job. So let me know what you guys think. Big Bang Hemi, it worked good. I like these Hemis. They make lots of power. They have a really good cylinder head, just like the LS. Now they have camshafts for them. The factory intakes actually work fairly well. The SRT8 works good. Even the truck manifold works good, and it works as good as the SRT8. Not quite as much peak power, but certainly more average power. The Magnum is one that I really like for any kind of street application. I wish guys came out with even better aftermarket versions, but let's see what happens with the Hemi. I want that market to continue to grow, but they make a lot of power, so they make a lot of power NA. When you add boost, they make even more power. All we got to do is figure out just how much that peak power is. I'm Richard Holder. Guys, make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff, and I'll keep testing.